She was the angel of love story, Hollywood's symbol of innocence. But behind the cameras, Ali MacGraw lived a truth far darker than any script. At the height of her fame, she stepped into the orbit of Steve McQueen, the king of cool, whose charm hid a storm of jealousy, control, and chaos. Their fairy tale romance would become the love that made her and the love that destroyed her. A childhood shaped by shadows and the dangerous road into Hollywood. Before the world crowned her the radiant heroine of love story, Ali MacGraw was just a quiet girl trying to survive a home where love cracked under pressure. She grew up in Bedford Village, far from the glamour she would one day embody, inside a house where silence never lasted long and peace never stayed. Her father, a brilliant but broken man, wrestled with alcoholism that turned simple evenings into emotional battlegrounds. Her mother, equally wounded, fought back with sharp words and sharper tempers. For young Ali, every day felt like stepping into a room where the storm had already begun. Those childhood tremors carved deep insecurities into her, an ache to escape, and an even deeper craving for stability she never truly had. Modeling became her escape route, not a dream, but a doorway. Under the guidance of the legendary Diana Vreeland, Ali slipped into the world of high fashion, where perfect lighting and perfect poses hid the fractures no one else could see. She had a presence, elegant, mysterious, quietly magnetic. And Hollywood noticed. Her first film, Goodbye Columbus, didn't just introduce her, it exposed her. Audiences saw something raw in her eyes, something shaped by survival rather than fame. And among those captivated was Robert Evans, the powerful head of Paramount Pictures. Evans didn't just see an actress, he saw a phenomenon waiting to be unleashed. He believed she could carry a film on her shoulders. He believed she could change Hollywood. He believed she could be unforgettable. And he was right. But as Ali stepped into the blinding light of stardom, she had no idea that the path she was walking, paved with success, love, and destiny, was quietly leading her toward a man who would alter her life forever, in ways she never could have imagined. The king of cool was waiting in the shadows, and her life was about to take a turn no fairy tale could prepare her for.
I'm a lot better off now than I was an hour ago.
The Getaway, a fateful collision and the love that broke everything. Hollywood thought it was just another casting choice. Ali MacGraw would soon learn it was the moment her life veered off a cliff she never saw coming. In 1972, still married to producer Robert Evans and glowing at the height of her fame, Ali stepped onto the Texas set of The Getaway. Waiting for her was Steve McQueen, the legendary king of cool, a man whose very presence seemed to bend the air around him. He wasn't simply a movie star, he was a force, dangerous and irresistible, the kind of man people didn't meet so much as survive. Ali felt it instantly. Years later, she admitted with chilling clarity, "I knew I was going to get in serious trouble with Steve. From the first rehearsals, their chemistry wasn't just visible, it was combustible. Crew members whispered, reporters circled. Every glance, every scene, every unscripted spark between them pulled them deeper into something neither of them chose, but both surrendered to." Hollywood turned their connection into a fairy tale. Behind the scenes, it was closer to a wildfire. McQueen, 12 years older, carried a childhood carved from abandonment and brutality. That pain became charisma, raw, broken, addictive. Ali, already fragile from her own emotional wounds, was drawn to him with a force that felt chemical, inevitable. Their affair exploded into the open. By the end of 1972, Ali's marriage to Evans, her mentor, her champion, the man who made her a star, was over. He was blindsided. Hollywood was stunned. And Ali, swept up in a love she couldn't control, walked straight into McQueen's world. In July 1973, they married. To the outside world, it was a dream pairing, two icons, beautiful and burning bright. But the vows came with chains. McQueen demanded a prenuptial agreement, leaving her with nothing if she left. More devastatingly, he ordered her to abandon her career entirely. At the peak of her power, adored by millions, Ali stepped away from the spotlight to keep a man who was already beginning to slip into his own darkness. She later confessed she agreed out of fear, not of him, but of losing him. Fear that love required sacrifice. Fear that silence kept the peace. Fear born from a childhood where affection was always unstable. What she didn't know was this: McQueen's love burned bright, but it also burned everything it touched. Their story was no fairy tale. It was the opening act of a tragedy, one fueled by obsession, control, and a chemistry so powerful it would ultimately consume them both. And the real destruction hadn't even begun. Life with Steve McQueen: control, jealousy, and the slow erosion of a woman's soul. To the outside world, Ali MacGraw and Steve McQueen looked like the perfect Malibu dream. Sunlit mornings on the beach, late-night barbecues with friends, a couple too beautiful to break. But behind the locked doors of their oceanfront home, the man the world idolized as the king of cool revealed a very different face. McQueen carried wounds deeper than fame could mask. Abandoned by his father, discarded by his mother, raised in turbulence, he learned early that trusting anyone, especially women, was dangerous. And in marriage, those scars hardened into something darker. Ali began to feel it almost immediately. His jealousy was constant, sudden, volcanic. A simple conversation with another man could ignite hours of accusations. Yet paradoxically, McQueen himself flirted openly, disappearing into nights fueled by alcohol, drugs, and whispers of affairs that circled Hollywood like smoke. For Ali, the contradiction was devastating. She had surrendered her career to be his wife, her identity, her independence, her voice. But the more she gave, the more he demanded. She later admitted she played every role he wanted: cook, cleaning lady, simple woman. Not a wife, not a star, just someone trying to keep peace in a house built on tension. The isolation grew thick, almost physical. While McQueen dominated movie screens as the ultimate lone wolf, Ali's world shrank to the size of their home, raising her son Joshua, managing McQueen's moods, and pretending the silence didn't hurt. She began to drink, not for pleasure, but to numb the emptiness that followed her through every room. Meanwhile, McQueen, spiraling deeper into addiction, became even more unpredictable. Some nights he would return shaky and withdrawn, other nights charged with suspicion or anger. The man loved by millions was, in private, a storm she could never outrun. The fairy tale had rotted from within. Hollywood still adored him. Posters still showed him as invincible. But Ali lived with the truth. Behind the swagger was a man terrified of being left, and who controlled the world around him to avoid that fear. And she, once the luminous darling of love story, had become a ghost in her own life. By the mid-1970s, something inside her began to break. Not dramatically, quietly. The way a heart breaks after years of being asked to stay silent. MacGraw later revealed she was terrified of speaking her mind, terrified of being abandoned, terrified that any moment of honesty would shatter the fragile peace she had spent years trying to hold together. But even the quietest suffering eventually reaches its limit, and Ali was standing dangerously close to hers.
A quick thrill in Texas, so we...
The breakup and the fall of a legend. By 1976, the cracks in Ali MacGraw and Steve McQueen's marriage were no longer cracks. They were fault lines ready to split apart. To Hollywood, McQueen was still the invincible renegade, the man who made danger look effortless. But inside their Malibu home, he was unraveling. His old addictions tightened around him like wires. Long nights of drinking, drugs, vanishing without a word, returning with eyes that carried either suspicion or silence. Ali, having already traded her career for his demands, now found herself living beside a stranger whose darkness seemed determined to swallow them both. Loneliness crept in like a second shadow. She had given up everything to stay beside him, yet felt more abandoned than ever. Rumors of McQueen's affairs drifted through Hollywood, whispers she tried desperately to ignore until denial became impossible. Each rumor was a bruise, each truth, a fracture. And in her desperation to feel something other than forgotten, Ali stumbled into mistakes of her own, choices born not from desire, but from pain. Their marriage, once fueled by passion, had become a quiet battlefield of betrayals neither could forgive. By 1977, she reached her breaking point. She wanted to act again, to reclaim the woman she had been before she disappeared into someone else's world. When she told McQueen she needed her career back, his response was as cold as metal. "Then we're filing for divorce." It wasn't an argument. It was a sentence. A confirmation that her voice had never been part of the deal. Stepping onto the set of Convoy became her first act of rebellion, her first breath of freedom in years. But it was also the moment that ensured their marriage could never be repaired. The trust, whatever remained of it, was gone. They divorced in 1978, 5 years after the world had celebrated their wedding as a Hollywood fairy tale. And then, in a twist more cruel than any script could invent, Steve McQueen's life ended just 2 years later. In 1980, at the age of 50, he died from a rare cancer triggered by asbestos exposure. The news shattered Hollywood. But for Ali, the grief was complicated, heavy with the weight of love, regret, and everything left unresolved. She admitted later, with heartbreaking simplicity, "I wish we had both grown old sober." A single sentence that carried the entire tragedy of their story. In the end, theirs was not a romance. It was a collision, a love that burned bright enough to change both of them, and destructive enough to leave scars that shaped the rest of her life. If you were in her place, would you have chosen love or walked away sooner?
I'd like to see Jack Benyon.
Life after Steve, addiction, recovery, and the long road back to herself. When Steve McQueen died in 1980, Ali MacGraw was only 41, too young to be widowed, yet too wounded to feel free. Their marriage had ended, but his death struck her with a force she never expected. The man who had broken her heart, silenced her voice, and consumed her world was suddenly gone forever. And with him vanished the last chance for closure, forgiveness, or understanding. Grief didn't come gently. It arrived like a wave that dragged her backward into every memory she tried to outrun. She tried to return to the world she once ruled. Convoy gave her a spark of momentum, and later, her role in Dynasty offered a glimmer of the old spotlight. But Hollywood had moved on without her. Directors saw her as a relic, beautiful, iconic, yet trapped in the shadow of a love story that had swallowed her career. Every audition felt heavier than the last. Every camera felt colder. And beneath the surface, a different battle was quietly tightening its grip. Alcohol, once an escape from the chaos of her marriage, had turned into a prison she could no longer deny. By the early 1990s, she reached a breaking point far darker than anything she had faced with McQueen. She checked herself into the Betty Ford Center, not as a star seeking privacy, but as a woman fighting for her life. Recovery forced her to confront every wound she had buried, the violent storms of her childhood, the self-sacrifice of her marriage, the silence she'd been taught to keep, and the unbearable weight of loving a man who both lifted and destroyed her. It was brutal, humbling, necessary. And for the first time in decades, she began to breathe without fear. Her rebirth continued in 1991 with Moving Pictures, the memoir that stripped away every mask Hollywood had given her. She wrote with honesty so raw it stunned readers, confessing her childhood traumas, her addictions, her complicated love for McQueen, and the cost of becoming a symbol instead of a person. The book became a bestseller, not because it was glamorous, but because it was true. By 1994, she did something that shocked everyone. She walked away. Not from a role, not from a studio, but from Hollywood itself. She moved to Santa Fe, choosing silence over applause, healing over reputation. And in the quiet desert light, she rebuilt a life she never allowed herself to imagine. Simple, spiritual, self-owned. Yoga replaced chaos. Art replaced avoidance. Sobriety became her anchor. For the first time, she wasn't someone's muse, someone's wife, someone's creation. She was simply Ali. Her journey was not a comeback, it was a resurrection, and the woman who emerged was stronger than the legend the world once adored.
Not so sure about that.
Reflection, sobriety, and the woman who finally owned her story. In Santa Fe, far from the cameras that once defined her, Ali MacGraw discovered the one thing Hollywood could never offer her: peace. Not the fragile peace she had chased all her life, the kind that depended on someone else's approval or affection, but the quiet, steady kind that grows only after surviving every storm. She built a life stripped of fame, fear, and performance. Mornings began with yoga and meditation. Days passed in the company of paintbrushes, animals, and the desert sun. And slowly the noise inside her, years of regret, guilt, longing, and loss, fell silent. She has now been sober for more than 3 decades, a milestone she once believed was impossible. Sobriety didn't just save her life, it returned her voice. For the first time, she stopped rewriting the past and stopped fantasizing about futures she could never reach. Instead, she began living in the present, fully, honestly, gratefully. "I feel blessed," she said, a simple sentence carved from years of hard-won clarity. She never remarried, not because love had failed her, but because she had finally learned to choose herself. Instead of romance, she filled her world with friendship, creativity, and purpose. Her reunion with Ryan O'Neal in the stage production Love Letters reminded audiences of the chemistry that once made them America's favorite tragic lovers. But to Ali, it was simply a gentle echo of a past she no longer needed to escape or reclaim. She poured her energy into empowering women across the world, partnering with EBU to support female artisans and preserve cultural craftsmanship. For a woman who once gave up her dreams to fit inside a man's shadow, this work became a declaration. She was no longer shrinking herself for anyone. Even now, at 86, she speaks about Steve McQueen with a clarity that only truth and time can provide. She describes him exactly as he was, magnetic and destructive, tender and terrifying, a man whose brilliance was always fighting his demons. She doesn't romanticize him, nor does she vilify him. There were wonderful days, she says, and there were ghastly ones. It is the kind of honesty that no longer seeks sympathy or forgiveness, only understanding. Ali MacGraw is no longer the young woman from Love Story, nor the fallen star who disappeared into a man's orbit. She is something far more powerful, a survivor who walked through fame, heartbreak, addiction, death, and reinvention, and emerged with the strength to tell the truth the world never saw. Her memories of Steve McQueen are both love and warning, beauty and ruin. They remind us that even the most glamorous romances can hide the darkest battles. And in the end, her greatest triumph wasn't winning Hollywood or surviving Steve McQueen. It was finally becoming the woman she was never allowed to be.
And Ryan was brilliant.
The truth she finally dared to tell. In the twilight of her life, Ali MacGraw no longer protects the myth that once defined her. What the world believed was a Hollywood fairy tale, an overnight star, a whirlwind romance, a tragic ending, was, in truth, a survival epic carved from wounds the cameras never caught. She grew up in a home where tempers cracked like thunder, found fame that felt more like exposure than triumph, and surrendered a brilliant career to a man whose love could lift her one moment and destroy her the next. For decades, she stayed silent. Hollywood preferred her that way, beautiful, fragile, tragic, convenient. They turned her into an icon, then punished her when she walked away. After Steve McQueen, after addiction, after the collapse of everything she once trusted, Ali disappeared into Santa Fe, not as an exile, but as a woman reclaiming her breath. And from that silence came a truth sharper than anything she ever dared to speak on screen. At 86, she tells her story without trembling. She speaks of the nights she drank to numb fear, the years she lived inside a man's shadow, the price she paid for choosing love over herself. She doesn't romanticize McQueen. She doesn't vilify him either. She describes him exactly as he was, magnetic, broken, brilliant, and dangerous. A storm she mistook for shelter. But the revelation that hits hardest isn't about him. It's about Hollywood. A world that adored her innocence but ignored her suffering. A world that quietly discards women the moment they stop shining. Her honesty forces a painful question, one far more haunting than any headline ever printed about her. How many Hollywood legends survived the same darkness, smiling for the cameras while living battles they were too afraid to name? Ali MacGraw finally named hers, and in doing so, she became something the industry never expected. Not a fading star, but a woman who owned her truth so completely that no spotlight could ever define her again.
But you know, the intervening many years have made me